This week, we're talking about the heart. This is Alter Your Health Live, your source of information and inspiration to promote the holistic transformation of your health and the health of our planet. I'm your host, Dr. Benjamin Alter.
And I'm your co-host, Dr. Susanna Alter.
And this week, we're talking about your heart because we love you and we love your heart and we want you to love your heart as much as we love your heart. And we're going to talk about food, exercise, cholesterol, family history, all the risk factors. And we're also going to talk about love and community and connection because that's a significant piece in cardiovascular heart health as well.
Exactly.
So this, as we were just talking, Susanna and I, this topic is up for us for a number of reasons. I think, first of all, for me, I just lost a beloved friend due to a cardiovascular event. He was a young guy. And cardiovascular disease is the number one killer. It has been for decades. And it's also kind of a silent disease, as is the case a lot of the time, at least with this friend of mine. You know, he was a young guy, and these, a heart attack can come out of nowhere and kill you. And we don't want to live a life in fear, that's for sure. But we want to do all we can to make sure that we're nourishing ourselves and preventing any sort of catastrophic event like this that is just so common even in our modern age, especially in our modern age.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add?
No, you're on a roll.
So heart health is important. I feel like, gosh, have we talked about it enough? Not we personally, because we haven't talked about it. But a lot of professionals are focusing on heart health, cardiovascular disease prevention. And I think I get really excited about it because it is kind of the first area in terms of lifestyle medicine where diet interventions and lifestyle interventions have been for sure shown not only to prevent chronic disease, but to completely reverse chronic disease. So heart disease is completely reversible with diet and lifestyle. It's been proven for decades. And we're going to talk about how to do that if you don't already know. We're going to talk about some of the risk factors, and we're going to talk about narrowing in and addressing each one of these individual risk factors. We're also going to talk about love and connection and community, which is hugely important. I think I already said what we're going to talk about a couple times, so we're going to talk about it.
Yeah. But yeah, I do have something to say actually off of what you're saying about how heart disease can be kind of a silent disease. And I think because of that, young people like ourselves, it's usually not really something we think about on a day-to-day basis. The doctor doesn't, usually even start screening for health-related stuff until later mid-30s and beyond. So I think, it is something really important to think about because your actions when you're young and youthful and energetic can actually really impact the health of the heart later on in the later years.
Totally. And I'm going to get right into that because it's actually been shown that fatty streaks develop in arteries, in cardiovascular arteries, at age 10. There was some study done in the 1980s that took, they didn't cut open 10-year-olds, but they took a population of children who died of other causes, sad causes, and they did autopsies on these arteries, and they found that 100% of these children at age 10 had fatty streaks in their blood vessels. And fatty streaks is kind of the first known symptom that we can find and see that is first known stage that's in the progression of cardiovascular disease. So there are many different risk factors of cardiovascular disease that I'm going to touch upon. Those include cholesterol, which is the most famous of the risk factors. There's also hypertension, there's obesity, there's smoking, there's physical inactivity or a sedentary lifestyle, and of course, there's family history. And an additional comorbidity or an other disease that's very commonly associated with cardiovascular disease is, of course, diabetes, which has a lot of these similar risk factors as well. So, like I said, cardiovascular disease starts early in life for all of us. I can assure you that even though I'm, doing my due diligence in this life, I can assure you that I probably have some fatty streaks in my blood vessels. Just
what? You really?
Yeah. I mean, probably if all 10-year-olds do, then I'm older than 10, so I probably do. And the goal is just to not progress this in this exponential curve throughout our life. We want to dampen down the curve, and we want to live long and healthy life. That's the point of this, right? So fatty streaks develop early in life, but they don't have to. I don't think they have to, at least. And the main risk factor for these atherosclerotic lesions is, like I said, cholesterol. And there's been so much debate and talk about cholesterol, good cholesterol, bad cholesterol. Cholesterol is associated with cardiovascular disease. Cholesterol isn't associated with cardiovascular disease. You can find information that supports any view on the topic. The fact of the matter is that for decades, since the 1950s, cholesterol has been the single number one direct correlator with cardiovascular disease that we can identify on a biochemical in a laboratory test. And there's been some studies specifically funded by the egg industry, are the most popular ones, that show that cholesterol is not associated with cardiovascular disease. But the problem with these studies is that they're looking at this curve, and they're focusing in on the top point of the curve where things level out. So if you don't eat any eggs ever, or you don't eat very little animal products and cholesterol, dietary cholesterol, and you start eating some amount of dietary cholesterol, your cholesterol is going to shoot up. But if you eat 2 eggs a day or the equivalent, or 3 eggs a day or the equivalent, and you add a 4th egg, then that's not going to impact your dietary cholesterol that much. So those studies that show that dietary cholesterol doesn't impact total cholesterol in the blood are just simply looking at the top part of that curve. So hopefully that makes sense. And it's important to know also that there are different types of cholesterol, of course. There's LDL, and we know that LDL is the quote unquote bad cholesterol, and there's HDL. But LDL can further be classified into large particle size and small particle size. And there are more intricate tests that look into particle size, of course. And it's important to know that the big fluffy particles are more safe and they're not as risky as the small dense particles. If you consider just like someone throwing a baseball at your artery versus a beach ball, that's kind of a metaphor that might be helpful. You don't want baseballs bouncing around in your arteries. You'd rather have big fluffy beach balls.
I like that.
Yeah. And then HDL is protective, or quote unquote protective, because HDL actually takes cholesterol and brings it back to the liver to be stored in a process known as reverse cholesterol transport. So there's all sorts of cholesterol. So when we're looking at all these, blood tests and measurements, it's important to know that they are important despite what popular trendy beliefs are out there. And it's important to know that we can modify these levels based on diet and exercise, which is what I'm going to talk about as well.
Yeah. We have a question about cholesterol. Do you want to speak to it? It's about low cholesterol.
Low cholesterol.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So a lot of people are scared into the belief that they need to have some baseline level of cholesterol. Like if they dip down too low, then they're going to have, I don't know what disease could come from low cholesterol, but
well, reproductive issues.
Yeah, reproductive issues and hormonal issues, because it's important to know that cholesterol is a building block of every cellular membrane. It's also a building block of steroid hormones and vitamin D and bile, which is important for breaking down more cholesterol and more fat. So yeah, you do need cholesterol, but in terms of a baseline level, there have been studies, they've looked at different populations in Asia, for example, and they found that an average cholesterol level in Asia is like 120 compared to like 220 in the US. So anywhere, if you're below 100, I think that's a time to maybe consider, what am I deficient in my diet, or what's going on. But in the low 100s, I think there's no reason to worry.
It could also point to potentially an issue with absorption of nutrients in the gut, so some kind of digestive issue going on. But certainly if levels of cholesterol are low and there are some symptoms going on, such as reproductive issues, then there's definitely a level that is too low.
Yeah, it's probably a case of malnourishment in that sense.
But we don't know what your unique cases. We're speaking very generally, very broadly. Yes. So. All
right. So back to the foods. There's cholesterol, which is important to know about, and cholesterol only comes from animal products. So the first thing to do, if you do have high levels of these quote unquote bad cholesterol, is to eliminate cholesterol from your diet, or at least significantly reduce cholesterol from your diet. That's done by eliminating animal products or significantly reducing animal products. And then there's some special foods. I don't think they're that special. They're plants that have high amounts of soluble fiber that help to bind excess cholesterol and shuttle the cholesterol through the digestive system and flush it down the toilet. So that's one great thing that fiber does, is bind this cholesterol, shuttle it down, and shuttle it throughout our body. Additionally, specific foods that are high in fiber are like oats and oatmeal and beans and eggplant and okra. If you think about the slimy foods that have that mucilaginous component, that is the type of fiber that cholesterol binds up with, and you can flush it down the toilet. So yes, anything you wanted to add about cholesterol or fiber, Dr. Suze?
No, I'm going to let you continue talking. We've kind of split this live up a little bit differently, because Ben's going to be talking a lot in the beginning, and then I'll take over towards the end.
And I'll try not to interrupt you in the end. So in addition to cholesterol, that's just one key component. But once cholesterol is floating around in the bloodstream, it can kind of cause havoc in the endothelial. Endothelium is the lining of the blood vessels. It can kind of damage the endothelium, and it can create oxidation in the endothelium and cause what we call endothelial dysfunction. And the main way to prevent endothelial dysfunction is with dietary antioxidants, because this endothelial dysfunction is an oxidative process, and these cholesterol molecules become oxidized, and then it's kind of just downhill from there. So we want a high level of antioxidants in the diet, and these antioxidants are, they've been known to be these superfoods for a long time. And the one that's been studied a lot is actually Amla powder, which is the powder of Indian gooseberries. And Amla powder beats out wild blueberries in the highest amount of antioxidants, specifically to support endothelial function. But things like blueberries, and really things that have any amount of colorful pigment in them, can be really supportive for the endothelium, and not specifically to reduce cholesterol, but reduce the oxidative stress that might come from cholesterol oxidation. So additionally, greens, any type of green leafy vegetable, and vitamin C is also very important. Vitamin C is really important for vascular health. Yes, and we have another question.
What if there's too much fiber coming from whole food, plant-based diets?
Too much fiber. There's really no such thing as too much fiber, because unless you're doing fiber supplements. But as long as you're eating fiber in the whole food source, it's really, really, really hard to overdo fiber. The only time you can overdo fiber, if you go from like a no fiber diet, like eating just eggs and bacon, to a really high fiber diet, then that can be an overwhelm to the system. So you don't want to make that big drastic leap. But granted that you're on this, generally, balanced whole food plant-based diet, it's really difficult to overdo fiber. So that's probably not the cause of low cholesterol, too much fiber. Moving on into our other components of supporting the vascular system nutritionally. Another key component that I mentioned in the beginning is hypertension or high blood pressure. And if you think about blood pressure, it's like, yeah, we want that to be calmed down, because if the blood pressure is elevated, there's a lot more turbulence in the blood flow in our vascular system. And if there's turbulence, then these cholesterol molecules, these baseballs and beach balls, are hitting the walls and everything's going wild and crazy. So we don't want our blood pressure to be consistently elevated. Of course, blood pressure is elevated naturally with exercise and things like that, but chronic elevations in blood pressure or hypertension can be addressed with all of the things that I talked about above, in addition to some powerful nutrients, such as hibiscus tea is a really potent diuretic that helps flush the system, as well as celery juice, one of our favorite diuretics that has so many benefits. And beets are a great vegetable that increase nitric oxide, which helps dilate the blood vessels and reduce blood pressure as well. And then in terms of favorite mineral for supporting high blood pressure, magnesium does a similar thing that the nitric oxide does, and just helps relax the vascular endothelium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, nutrition and cardiovascular health is actually such a highly studied area when you look at the literature. And there's actually really great studies looking at specific diets and their impact on cardiovascular disease. And one thing I'd love to point out is the Mediterranean diet has been studied as being one of the most heart-healthy diets. And what they've seen is that it prevents the progression of plaque development within the arteries, which is really great. But what they've also studied is that a whole food plant-based diet that's lower in fat compared to, Mediterranean diet, which has a lot of olive oil in it, is the only diet that's been studied to reverse plaque in the arteries. So when I first heard that, I just went, wow, is that powerful or what? So just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, well, I've taken up so much time talking about this nitty-gritty nutritional science stuff like that, like you said, Susanna, that's been really overwhelmingly studied by so many people. And there's a lot of intricate things that we could tweeze apart, but I think in 18 minutes we did a pretty good job of getting through that. So do you want to move on to what I think is an even more important part of heart health?
Yeah, and I guess we're kind of skipping over exercise.
Yeah, we'll skip over exercise and we'll just say that cardiovascular exercise is great.
Yes, it's important. But diet and exercise, believe it or not, are not the only thing that contributes to heart health. And I was actually reminded of this great story that I originally read in a really great book called The Heart Speaks, which is written by Dr. Mimi Guarneri. I highly recommend reading that book. It's the book that first inspired me to even consider going into medicine myself. But anyway, she talks about this town called Roseto, Pennsylvania. And what's really unique about this town is that they've sifted through all the death certificates and found that it had in the 60s a really, really low rate of cardiovascular deaths from heart attacks.
Meanwhile, cardiovascular disease and deaths is going this way, but Roseto was not.
And so in this part of Pennsylvania, there were a lot of Italian immigrants. And there was the community of Roseto, but also surrounded by a lot of other communities that had, same kind of background from Italy, same lifestyle, same occupation, same income levels, same water, same access to food and nutrients. All these factors were the same, but Roseto stood apart because their cardiovascular rates were lower. So they looked into this and found that what made Roseto unique was that they really held on to this traditional kind of community aspect that was common in Italy at the time, but that the other communities had kind of let go of. They had become more Americanized. And so what was happening in these communities was that they had a really tight-knit family environment, but that the community between the families were also really involved with each other. They would offer help and support whenever a family needed a little bit of extra support. And there weren't as many barriers. There weren't as many like fences or clubs or things to kind of separate each other and privatize your life. They were more involved with each other's lives. And what's really crazy is you think like, okay, well, they must have still had some lifestyle factors that were helping them out here. But when you look at their lifestyle, they were smoking cigars every day, drinking tons of wine every day. The men actually worked in really toxic environments in slate quarries where there were lots of inhaled gases and dusts and everything that would lower life expectancy. And they were eating lots and lots of fried meats, kind of processed salami, cheese, high cholesterol food. So it's kind of the opposite of everything we talked about in terms of, risk factors for heart disease.
But there's a more powerful one that there's this
more powerful factor, and that's the sense of community. And so there is actually another great book written called The Power of Clan, and it kind of covers the town of Rosetta from 1935 to 1984. And they actually see that what happens in kind of the 80s and 90s is that the town just naturally becomes more and more Americanized. There's more kind of typical American shopping centers brought in and country clubs, and people are starting to show more separation through, this family has more wealth, and so they're showing that off, and there's this feeling of separation. And what happens is that by the 1990s, this town actually has the same rates of cardiovascular disease as all the surrounding towns. And what they really concluded in that book was that it was what the community provided before in the 60s was kind of this avoidance of isolation, this avoidance of internalization of stress. Because when people were, when they encountered stress in their life, they reached out to their neighbor, they reached out to their family, and they felt that support. And so I just think it's such a powerful story because it really shows the power of, connection with our fellow human beings.
Yeah. What the imagery that comes to mind when I hear stories like this is, as you talked about in the end, this internalization of stress. It's like energetically, the heart carries so much. And in a lifetime, it just gets a little burdened and grief strucken by loss and trauma and these kind of things. And as long as we're able to connect with others and share that and let that out and express that, then the heart doesn't weigh down.
Mm-hmm.
Then the heart doesn't get sclerotic and compressed and constricted.
Mm-hmm.
The heart remains open, both energetically speaking and like we can see and observe in these, observational studies, physically, the heart stays open, the heart stays functioning optimally.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, it is important to be connecting and be sharing and be expressing ourselves, especially in our world where I think we're more and more led to not do that, to not share, to not burden others with our pain or burden others with our grief or our sense of loss. But that's what friends and loved ones and community are for. So I think it's a great reminder to continue reaching out, continue connecting, continue using your support network and growing your support network to strengthen your cardiovascular system.
Yeah, because with Rosetto, it's not like they were living in this bubble where there was no stress at all. They actually encountered quite a bit of discrimination from the non-Italian community just towards them because of where they were from. And so, these people, it showed that the community network made them more resilient to stress. And we've spoken a little bit before about the impacts of stress on the health, but briefly, what happens in a state of stress is an increase of stress hormones like epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol. It increases blood pressure. There you go, risk factor. It increases cholesterol. There you go, risk factor. It increases blood glucose. And so there is just such a direct correlation between stress and heart disease.
It's so true. We look at, cholesterol and high blood pressure as kind of the root causes of cardiovascular disease. And I put root causes in quotation marks because, maybe they're not really the root cause. Maybe the root cause is this feeling of stress, feeling of disconnection. And maybe that's the one root cause that's causing it all. So it's important to look there.
I just want to say one quote that really touched me. And this is from a woman from Ikaria, which is one of the blue zones.
Yeah, one of the blue zones.
We've got a comment.
Yeah, so this is similar to the blue zones research that we love. Yeah,
it is. And yes, the name of the book is called The Heart Speaks by Mimi Guarneri. But back to Dan Buettner, he has done amazing work studying the blue zones, where these communities have been found to have the longest living humans in the world. And Ikaria has kind of been, Ikaria has a pretty healthy diet. They have some, they drink wine, they still smoke a little bit, they have dairy. So it's not perfect. And so when they studied Ikaria, they realized, okay, it still has this, it has this commonality of this tight community, this tight network. And there's a quote from this Ikarian woman that says, there's no word in Greek for privacy. When everyone knows everyone else's business, you get a feeling of connection and security. And that really made me think, because privacy I was raised I was a private person.
Yeah, close the doors, lock your house, make sure no one sees or hears. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and so I just, it really has me looking at sharing and, especially I feel like what Ben was saying before, we tend to not like to share when we're going through a hard time. We tend to only like to share when we're going through a good time. And so...
did I say that?
Did you say that? Well, that's what I heard when you were talking
I definitely
earlier.
believe that. I don't think I expressed that, but thanks for expressing that for me.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just a great reminder to ask for help.
Yeah. So speaking of help, we're here for you if you need help. And we're also, for 2 more days, we're running this promotional giveaway where we're giving away 4 one-month memberships. So 4 people will win a 1-month membership with either myself or Dr. Susanna. And in that month, we'll have 2 consultations. We'll have an action plan. We'll create an action plan together. We'll get to the root of what's going on, and we will be there in between our sessions with email support and that sort of thing as needed. And the intention is to really provide a service that jumpstarts you in the direction of your optimal health, whether there's been an acute thing or a chronic thing, or you just want to feel better, you just want more connection with your vitality. you want to be on track, that's what we're here for.
Mhm.
So go to alter.health/holiday-give-away.
That's it.
Holiday giveaway.
Or you can, if you're on Instagram, go to our bio and the link is right there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And yes, on that note, we wish you a very beautiful rest of your day and weekend. I guess it's almost the weekend, and we'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
Bye.